Whereas people across the country are concerned that there are troops being deployed and want to know what's real reporting on it versus what's Army Times spin. So I can no longer ignore the fact that, veterans. I was just addressed by a wonderful young man, a 24-year-old Iraq War vet, and he and his fellow veterans went to the gates of the presidential debate in New Jersey, the last presidential debate, wanting to ask rightly, why are Veterans Affairs not being addressed? And the war, not being addressed properly. And they were a police officer, on a horse, rode his horse into the crowd and trampled this young veteran so badly that his cheekbones were broken. And yet this brave young man was right there at Barnes & Noble the next day, speaking up again. I mean, that kind of do as American patriots, all of us. But I have to hand it to you. There is a giant blackout right now in the media on these core issues. And I that's why I call and give me liberty, but we need to build it and expand it so much on ordinary citizens to kind of withdraw their crediting of the mainstream media with authority and start becoming their own journalists and generating their own media. And, for instance, I teach people to write op-eds and leak to reporters and frame feature stories and so on. But I have to say I agree with you now.
I have a friend who was a Russian economist, now lives in this country, and he said that during the bailout mania, when you had the entire American media campaigning for the bailout in a hysterical and unrelenting fashion, that he was reminded of Pravda and Izvestia in the old days of the Soviet Union. He said the only difference was no Russian with a brain believed anything they read in Pravda and Izvestia, but that Americans seemed to believe the American media.
Well, let's go back to that question then about the psychological journey, because it is really painful to wake up to the fact that, the free press that you thought was working adequately is wholly owned, and that, your republic that you thought was kind of minimally at least limping along, is largely being run by puppet masters. I mean, how do people deal with that? There's the process.
Well, I guess you have to take the red pill. I mean, in one sense, but it's absolutely true that you never again think, or if the Matrix, you never again think the same way about everything. You can see through all the government propaganda. It's a great thing to know the truth. And once you do understand that, this is the biggest, richest, most powerful government ever to exist in the history of the world, the U.S. government, engaged in vast redistribution. The Republicans are talking about redistribution now. Of course, everything the government does is redistributive. They're okay if the money's going to Lockheed, but that's redistribution too. So we have this vast state, a vast world empire, and you just have to come to the conclusion, which I think you do if you start to read and think about it, that everything they say to us is a lie. I mean, my own rule of thumb is believe the opposite of everything the government says. I'm not always right, but I'm pretty much always right. And that includes the media that's in cahoots with the government. It includes much of the academic world. It includes, a lot of public intellectuals, with a few heroic exceptions like you. But once you see through it, once you realize that the government has its own motives, the government is not actually interested in the common good or the public good. The government is a parasite on the rest of society, and it benefits itself, and it benefits those agencies and institutions that are in cahoots with it in private society. But that it's not, they're not actually out for the common good. They don't actually care about our freedom. In fact, it's just the opposite. They're the enemy of our freedom. They're the enemy of our economic well-being. And again, I think that if in a crisis like the one we're in, the economic crisis, which I'm afraid is going to get worse, one good thing about that sort of a situation is radical change is possible. All of a sudden, people become open to radical ideas. You mentioned before dangerous radicalism. Well, of course, this is dangerous only to the bad guys. It's not dangerous to the cause of freedom. And so I actually am optimistic as I see more and more people interested, for example, in the Federal Reserve, more and more people opposed to the wars and to the empire. I think in this crisis, they're going to try to extract even more money from us through taxes and inflation for all their various schemes. But I think there's going to be a lot of opposition. I think we've got an interesting few years ahead of us, and it sure is a great thing that you're out there speaking and writing and telling the truth.
Well, I do, thank you for your kind words, but let me stress that, a couple of things. It's pretty nerve-wracking out here. I mean, now that I think some of the things we're saying are really kind of making a greater impact, the level of hate speech directed, at me, at my message, online, for instance, is really going through the roof. And so also just knowing what I know about closing societies, well, it's nice to have people like you and me and, our various colleagues across the spectrum out there kind of beating the drum. We're not going to all be safest until, millions of us are out there. And that is what is called for, closing society. You can't kind of leave it to anyone but a collective consciousness to shift. So I did want to say that. And it could be just that, I'm a mother of two children. So if I were childless, I'd probably be kind of out there on the barricades going, bring it on. But instead, I'm out there on the barricades going, please join me,
Well, of course that's right.
All.
No, I'm a father, too, and I agree with that. And I had a friend recently write me and said, don't worry, I'm going to send you oranges when you're in the FEMA camp.
Oh, God.
So, yeah, of course, there's no question this is a very frightening and desperate situation. But what's our choice? Our choice is either to go along or we have to fight it.
We have no choice. And thank you for prompting me to say that. I mean, one thing I'm always telling audiences, and I know it's true, is that people have a very mistaken idea from having not lived in an actual police state, that if you just keep your head down, you'll be okay. But that's a very dangerous delusion, that there is no safety in a police state. I just want to remind people, it doesn't matter if you've voted, with the regime your whole life, or if you're, a wholehearted evangelical. It doesn't matter. There's no safety in a police state through silence. The only safety is when millions of citizens challenge and take action against this closing down. But there are two more things I want to say about what you just said before. Okay, I believe that people who share, your worldview and the worldview that I'm increasingly kind of feeling sympathetic toward are very good at critical analysis, but I see less practical recommendations for action. And, of course, I've made some, movements in that direction with the last third of the book, which are these 55 action steps. But do you ever want your kind of team, your supporters, to be more proactive about, okay, well, here it comes. What do we do about it?
Well, I think that's, in fact, part of the division of labor. Some people are more engaged in intellectual work, others more in activism, and I don't think these are at all opposed. But at least my own role is to try to make people understand what's going on. Sometimes I think political action is actually, very much of a negative, and buying into the system, and it really doesn't make a huge difference which of these parties is elected to power. The same economic groups. Barack Obama's largest donor is Goldman Sachs.